Week 12 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I would start this week. The first kicker, Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So what a season it's been for Chris Boswell with the Steelers team. One of the more accurate kickers in the league. And 50-plus, he's automatic. So last week, another 350-plus field goal game for Chris Boswell. He had 24 fantasy points, and he's having a great season, like I said, for this offense for Pittsburgh, and they're one of the best teams in the league. Week 6 at Vegas, 17. Week 7 versus the Jets, 14. Week 8 versus the Giants, 14. Week 10 at the Commanders, 4. And Week 11 versus the Ravens, 24 fantasy points. He's going out there. He's putting points on the board. Week 12, another division matchup at the Cleveland Browns, where I know their defense isn't good and they're giving up a lot of touchdowns, but this Steelers offense all season long, for the most part, has been stalling out. So I think Chris Boswell could go out there once again and be a great performer, and he's definitely a kicker I would start this week. The next start, Jake Moody of the San Francisco 49ers. So Moody, I know he was shaky a couple weeks ago in his return in that ball game at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but Moody last week went out there. He had a decent ball game in the matchup versus Seattle Seahawks. So Jake Moody, we know he's a solid kicker for the most part. In the early part of his career, last season was drafted. So 2 games back, Week 10 at Tampa Bay, 10. Like I said, he left some points on the board in that one. In Week 11 versus Seattle, 5 fantasy points. In Week 12 at the Green Bay Packers, I expect this could be a high-scoring game between these two teams at Lambeau Field. And Jake Moody, he's got a good boot. He's got the distance. Just accuracy has been a problem for him this season. But like I said, last week he looked good. He's getting back into the thick of things. And when you're on a high-powered offense like the 49ers, the opportunities are going to be there. So I think Jake Moody's a decent start this week at Green Bay. And someone I would have in the starting lineup, the next kicker, Cameron Dicker of the Los Angeles Chargers, one of the more accurate kickers in all NFL. And from 50-plus yards, he's pretty much automatic as Cameron Dicker this season. So the last few games for him, Week 8 versus New Orleans, 7 fantasy points. Then Week 9, he had the goose egg in that one, unfortunately. Week 10 versus Tennessee, 9. And Week 11 versus the Bengals, a nice ball game, 12 fantasy points with a 53-yarder in that one. So Week 12, hardball bowl, it's going to be Baltimore Ravens coming to town, and this Raven team gives up the 15th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. So like I said, Dicker, one of the most accurate kickers in the league this season. He's got that long range boot, and this is going to be a high scoring game, I believe, between these two teams. We saw a high scorer last week for Cincinnati and Los Angeles, both teams going up and down the field with the Chargers winning at the end 34-27. So I think it could be high scoring between these two teams, and Dicker will get his opportunities once again. The next kicker, Jake Bates of the Detroit Lions. Jake Bates, he's been solid over the last few weeks, and when you're in arguably the best offense in all pro football, opportunities are going to come weekly for Jake Bates. So this week in an indoor game, another great matchup at the Colts. Give up the 12th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. In the last 3 out of 4 games, he's had 12 or more fantasy points is Bates. Week 8 versus Tennessee, 12. Week 9 at Green Bay, 6. Week 10 at Houston, 12. And Week 11 versus Jacksonville, 12 fantasy points. So he's going out there. He's getting the opportunities, a lot of extra points, obviously, but a few field goals mixed in as well. And this week at Indianapolis, where it's a slam dunk matchup, I think Bates, once again, could reach that double-digit mark. And the final kicker I have as a start this week's Jason Sanders of the Miami Dolphins. So this Dolphin offense has obviously turned it up over the last month of the season since Tua has returned to the lineup, and Jason Sanders 9 or more fantasy points since Tua's returned. Week 8 versus Arizona, 11. Week 9 at Buffalo, 9. Week 10 at the Rams, 15. And Week 11 versus the Raiders, 11 fantasy points. So this week a good matchup once again versus the Patriots, where their defense at times has been but don't break. And going back to Week 5 in that matchup, he had 11 fantasy points. So this Dolphin offense, they're putting points on the board, obviously scoring 23 or more points in each game since Tua returned to the lineup. And this week versus the Patriots, I think in that mid-20s, low 30s range, once again, this Miami Dolphin team could put up on the board. And we know Jason Sanders, he's been a pretty decent kicker, and you don't have to go to Gillette. This is another home game where he's been a better kicker at home than he's been on the road for the majority of the season. So that's a few kickers I would start for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.